If we want to make a change, we have to change the environment, right? We have to make it so that for the me who's right here, right now, it's easier and more fun and rewarding to do something different.
All right, let's kick off today's show. We're talking with Emily Falk, neuroscientist and author of What We Value, who studies how our brains make decisions about health, relationships, and what matters most. She's uncovered why your New Year's resolutions might be failing you, how your environment secretly controls your choices, and what your brain's value calculator is really optimizing for. Spoiler, it's not your long-term goals. Welcome to the show, Emily. It's great to have you. Welcome to the show, Emily. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
I'd love for you to set up for our audience the work you do and what drew you to study choice and values in human psychology and neuroscience.
Great. I am really interested in how people make all kinds of decisions. Early in my career, we were focused pretty heavily on health decision making. So things like helping people quit smoking or get more physical activity. We've done work with teenagers looking at risky decision making in cars and peer influence. And now a lot of my work is focused on climate change, because if we think about things that are relevant to our health and happiness, a lot of it has to do with the spaces that we're in. And so we're doing work on how people make decisions that are relevant to policies and also resilience. So things that connect us, like social connection, having a good time with friends and family, loneliness, and how we develop a sense of who we are and what we care about.
As I was reviewing the book, I just was struck by, obviously, we're coming out of the new year. Everyone makes resolutions, things that we value in January. And I think if we were to survey a lot of our audience members, they may have struggled here in February to keep those resolutions, even though we really value the decisions that we make. What's going on behind the scenes there based on your research?
Well, New Year's resolutions are a really interesting moment because we have a chance to reset, maybe reinvent ourselves in particular ways. And when I think about how we can create lasting behavior change, the brain systems that help us make these decisions are doing this all year long, right? So if you think about the brain's valuation system that takes inputs from lots of other systems, our self-relevance system, emotional processing systems, brain systems that help us think about what other people think and feel, all day, every day, it's making these calculations about what is likely to be good for me pretty much now, and maybe also in the long term if I start to think about it. So New Year's resolutions are a great time to take a step back and think about what it is that we actually care about, what we actually want to prioritize. But then when the rubber hits the road and all of life happens, right, there are so many things that we're trying to juggle. The way to be really successful is to have our environment set up in a way that can shift from those initial decisions that are handled by our brain's valuation system to other systems like our habit systems. And so when we think about that transition, having a situation that is conducive to making good choices, and by good choices, I mean ones that are aligned with our bigger picture goals and values, takes some work. So I think the value of New Year's resolutions is that it can help us take a minute to take a step back and think about, like, what are the places that are making it really hard for me to want to do this thing, and how can I make it so that it's part of my routine? Did you make any resolutions this year?
Yeah, certainly some health-related resolutions. I'm a new dad and celebrating my daughter's first birthday. I recognize that a lot of the time that I would spend on my fitness journey was going towards childcare, and I wanted to reset in the new year. But I think it's so interesting, coming out of December into January 1, you have this nice long break from the holidays, and you're just in a different place than you are here, February 3rd, and now life is hitting you again. And that decision fatigue does set in. That calculation is still happening. So we're basically saying on January 1, I value my health. And now February 3, I'm like, I still value my health, but there are a lot of other things that I'm weighing.
The way that the brain's value system works really prioritizes the me that's right here, right now. And when we think about what that means, it means that the payoff, when we think about long-term health, like, for example, staving off heart disease or cancer in the future, that's actually not so relevant to the me that's right here, right now, right? Abstractly, it certainly could be. But if we want to make the physical activity or like an exercise goal, a resolution to get more active stick, the research shows that actually what we want to do is make it rewarding to the person who's actually making the decision, the person who's right here in the room at this very moment. So, if you are trying to, say, train for a marathon, but you really don't love running, then that's going to be effortful every single day. Whereas if there's some other kind of exercise, like if you have a newborn, and when my kids were little, I remember we would like put them in bags essentially, and then, be doing weightlifting up and down, and they would laugh and laugh, and it would be really rewarding in that moment. And likewise, going for a brisk walk with a friend where you get to catch up, or going to a dance class, or even just having like a dance party in your kitchen if you're a new parent, right? Like those things that bring the rewards much closer are much more likely to be sustainable. So there's really good research that shows that when people decide to make these kinds of resolutions or to change their behavior, they often choose the thing that they think is going to be the best for them in the long term. But that doesn't make them want to do it. And what does make them want to do it is if they choose something that's maybe like a little less healthy. This is true for exercise, for foods, for lots of different kinds of health behaviors, but that's actually sustainable. That's something that's rewarding right now.
Yeah. And I found myself when I've been able to tie two things together. So try to be productive at work, recognizing I don't have as much time to do the things that I need to do. And with that, maybe doing a zone 2 run while taking that call with Johnny and talking about some new marketing strategies, so that I'm combining those activities, knowing that, well, the zone 2 running I don't love as much, but I am being productive in that hour that I'm doing it while I'm having that conversation.
Yeah. And even better if you have a consistent habit of doing that, right? So if you decide, okay, January 1, I know that I need to figure out a way to build physical activity into my routine. If you're trying to sort of figure out who you can have those calls with and where they can fit into your day every day, that's too much, right? It's effortful every single time. But noticing that and doing kind of an audit of, okay, this is something I actually want to figure out how to build in, then maybe if Johnny is the person, you have a set time where you're going to do it and you're going to get held accountable, and you're also going to know that, okay, it's 10:30 a.m. It's time for me to do my zone 2 run and have this call. And then you get into that habit. Like I've been noticing we've been getting slammed on the East Coast with snow, and the place that I usually go for my morning run is completely not accessible right now. And so for a couple of weeks, it was sort of, what am I going to do? Right. And I fit in some janky cardio, like walking up and down the stairs in my house while on calls, or, just looking to do these like very unstable runs around the park near my house. But it's really noticeable when our routines get thrown off like that. And so this fresh start effect of like New Year's resolutions, or even just the fact that, there's another Monday coming up, gives us a chance to take a step back and think about what our bigger picture goals are, and then how we can set up our environment to make it really easy. And when I say that, I mean the social people. So like with your example, if you know that your calls with Johnny are always going to be the two of you taking that walking or running, that's an example. But also, what do you need to have set up in advance? Like the exercise clothes are important. You don't want to necessarily be trying to go for a run in your blue jeans. So getting dressed in the morning, prepared for what you're going to do.
When we think about this value calculator, it feels exhausting, all these different things that we're weighing all the time.
Well, yes and no, right? That this is happening automatically. So your brain is calculating these decisions, whether you're taking a step back to reflect on them or not. So there are all of these different inputs that are being fairly seamlessly integrated. And we see this in the choices that we make when we play silly games like Would You Rather. So if we played a game of Would You Rather right now, we could ask each other all kinds of things, right? Like, would you rather go skydiving tomorrow, or would you rather snuggle up on the couch and read a book? And those things aren't inherently comparable, but I'm sure you have some sort of gut reaction about which of those things you'd rather do, right? Like which would you rather do if you had some time tomorrow
the
afternoon?
Couch, for sure.
The couch. Okay. So, that cozy feeling, you get this sense, and it doesn't feel effortful to make that decision, right? And so I think it's pretty incredible that we have this infrastructure that allows us to make those kinds of choices that vary on all different kinds of dimensions, are not that easy to weigh against each other in a pro con list necessarily. I mean, obviously, you could do that in an effortful way. And then the question is, given that we're doing that so seamlessly all day, every day, in a way that we may not even be paying attention to, what are the places where we want to maybe rebalance what's going into that calculation, right? So if you chose the couch, I totally feel you. Like right now, I'm in couch mode also. But if you took a step back and you thought about, like, oh, well, when's the last time that I did something really crazy with my friends or had a really new experience? Like, I don't know about you, I've never gone skydiving. So we could potentially convince ourselves that, like, I could be the kind of person who does that. And so even if our initial impetus is, well, that's not really me, right? That self-relevance part of it weighs really heavily. Or my partner would be really like against this. I have a new baby, right? Like, who's going to go skydiving? And some of those are like really sensible things, like your partner's feelings when you have a new baby about doing a high risk activity, really sensible. But there are also lots of places where our sense of like who we are might limit our sense of possibility in terms of career moves, in terms of, who we think we might be friends with, who we should hire. And so in those situations, understanding how your brain is integrating information about things like self-relevance and how that might limit the possibilities that you see for yourself can also be really powerful.
A lot of high performers really focus on that identity piece to create goals in their lives and drive themselves to those goals. But can that be that rigidity, could that be something that works in their favor, but also works against them? Because when I think about this and we ask our clients to define their identity, it also feels like it shifts and moves, and it's not as rigid as we think.
Yeah, our identities are really interesting because there are certainly core parts of our identities that hopefully we can hold on to. So things like our core values that matter really can carry us through lots of different kinds of situations. But there's so much more variability in our day-to-day experiences and what's possible than I think most people think about. So like for me, one interesting example is purpose. I think many people think about purpose as something that some people have and other people don't have. Maybe they imagine like Mother Teresa or somebody who's a very purposeful or very successful business person as an example of someone who had a lot of drive and a set of goals and values that really propelled them through life. And it can feel like, well, that's not me. But when we look empirically at data that we've collected in my lab and that other people have collected, you see that there's fluctuation around that baseline. So people on some days feel a lot more purposeful and on other days feel a lot less purposeful. And so when you start to notice that there's that variability, you can think about, well, what are the things that make it more likely that I can feel purposeful today? So things like reflection, right? Self-reflection can do that, like values affirmation, where we reflect on things that really matter to us and how we're enacting those in our day-to-day lives or where they've been important in previous decisions we've made. But for people who aren't as into that kind of maybe touchy-feely reflection, other things like these basic health behaviors we've been talking about, like getting a good night's sleep, is also related to how purposeful we feel. I know that's maybe not a fair thing to say to a new parent, but these feed-forward cycles where like how purposeful we feel then informs whether we're going to get off the couch and go for a little run or a walk, whether we're going to get a good night's sleep. And then that in turn affects how purposeful we feel and so on. And that's just one example. There are so many things that I think we think of as fixed and trait-like that actually the trait-like part of it is the baseline, and then we fluctuate around that. And so figuring out like what is the zone where I can move and where I can do more of the things that make me the kind of person that I want to be, or make it possible for my team to do things that they want to do. And how can I mitigate those slumps?
Yeah, I think with many of our clients, when we talk about core values, and we're huge proponents of understanding your core values and looking to reflect on them, one of the challenges that they always share is, well, it's just hard to choose. They all sound so great, and really narrowing it down can be difficult, especially if we then want to like turn it into long-term goals for ourselves and find motivation in them.
The good thing, though, from the point of view of what we're talking about, is that it's not like you have to choose one and that that's the only thing that can matter forever, right? That when we reflect on core values, a lot of people choose things like friends and family, or compassion. Some people choose spirituality, or, there's a whole range of things that people might choose. But just because I do this exercise where I'm focusing on how my relationships really matter to me for this purpose doesn't necessarily have to mean that other values aren't important to me. And values affirmation is actually like such a robust intervention. There's so much psychology and neuroscience that's been done about what happens, like both as we're doing it and then afterwards. So getting to reflect on our core values for a couple of minutes in my lab and other people's work, the messages that follow, like, for example, when people get coaching, they're then more receptive to those messages. We ran a couple of studies with folks who are relatively sedentary, so not getting a lot of physical activity. And the folks who got a chance to reflect on values that mattered a lot to them, so let's say their friends and family, before they were then exposed to the health coaching messages, showed more activation in these self-relevance and valuation regions of their brain when they got exactly the same coaching messages than people who reflected on why other values might matter to somebody else. So it's the same procedure, the same protocol, the same words and sentences that they're hearing about why physical activity would be good for them. And when they haven't gotten to do that values affirmation first, they're more defensive and their brains are less responsive in these regions that then translate into behavior change.
That's so fascinating. And I'd love to go deeper into the social world, because the social influence is a big part of this. And sometimes we may not even realize how it impacts the decisions we're making. And I know for me personally, that purpose has shifted now with my family growing. So a lot of my purpose before was more self-motivated, and now I'm looking at it quite differently. But we have many of our clients who consider themselves to be a bit more lone wolf and say, I don't care what other people think about me, and just focus on being self-motivated. But actually those social decisions weigh on what we value.
Exactly. There's so much evidence. This is one of the most replicated findings, I think, that the things that other people are doing and thinking and feeling, even if we aren't aware of it, are influencing what we do and what we think and what we feel. So this ranges from what we think is beautiful. Like, there have been a bunch of studies that use faces as the stimuli, where people look at other people's faces and make attractiveness judgments, and then they find out that their peers thought those faces were more or less attractive than they did. And later on, when they go to re-rate them, even though they're not consciously thinking about those evaluations of their peers, both their ratings change, so that their opinions about who's attractive and not attractive change, and also their underlying valuation, their brain's reward system activation changes. So they're showing now more reward activation, more evaluation activity in response to the faces that other people rated as attractive. So that's a really sort of simple example, but there are so many places where we see that other people's choices, even though we're not necessarily aware of it, are shaping our choices. I mean, in that physical activity work, we see that too. People who have more physically active folks in their social networks are showing more receptivity in these brain systems when they're getting the health coaching. So it's kind of behind the scenes affecting the way that we're processing the information that's coming in.
And it cuts both ways. Sometimes it can actually take us off track or influence us in ways that don't serve our goals. And you have an exercise in the book, a citation audit, thinking about those voices in our head that are guiding us and we're weighing, and how they might be taking us off course.
Just think about the internet right now. There are so many places where we can get information that's not true or that's dangerous. And so seeing many people do something isn't inherently good or bad, but it definitely is going to shape the way that we think and feel and behave. And yeah, the citation audit, I think, is really interesting because we are being bombarded all day, every day with voices face to face from people that we're spending time with. And I think many of us have some sense of who's in our social network, who we're spending time with in real life. But then we read books and we listen to podcasts and we watch television and we get all kinds of other inputs. to our value calculations and to our sense of who we are and to our social relevant system. So these kind of three systems are all working together and being influenced by the books that we read and the podcasts that we listen to and so on. And so, I think it's helpful to just make a list of whose voices are in my, literally, in my earbuds or in my head. Who are the people that I'm interacting with and who might be influencing me? And there's a couple pieces to that. Like one is that consistent with who I want to be? Like, are they people that I respect and admire? And then another part of that is the diversity of those networks, because there's a lot of evidence that diversity in lots of different dimensions can be really helpful for innovation, for solving problems, for thinking about the world in new and different ways. So, if we're at work, knowing that people have a diversity of experiences on our team can be really powerful. That's kind of step one. But then step two is being able to understand, like if we're in a diverse group of people, the other side of that is that it can be harder to get on the same page because we're not necessarily coming in with the same assumptions. And once we understand that we're not necessarily coming in with the same assumptions, we can do that extra work to be able to get our brains in sync enough to then explore that space. So, this is a topic that I just love so much. There's so much fascinating neuroscience in this area that's emerging, and also social science about the benefits of diversity, but also how we take advantage of it.
The problem for many of us, we touched on the loneliness epidemic, is a lot of us are ceding that power to the algorithm. And the algorithm is not really meant to show you diversity. It's actually narrowing to get more of your attention and feed you what it thinks you want more of. And oftentimes that narrowing doesn't allow us to listen to a different podcast or see another book that might be more beneficial. And as our social networks have collapsed or shrank due to some of the goals we have around our career, time spent with family, and we don't have as much of that diversity coming in, we lose that ability to get that extra perspective.
There's a series of neuroimaging experiments that I love where they show first that when people are listening to the same story, let's say, it can bring their brains into sync with one another. So when an audience watches the same movie or listens to the same podcast story, it literally brings people's brain activation into sync so that parts of their brain are doing the same thing at the same time, which is cool. But when you look at people who have very different assumptions coming into a situation, you see a different pattern. So, for example, there was a study in Princeton where they gave different groups of people different backstories before hearing a J.D. Salinger story. And when one group of people was given a backstory highlighting that the protagonist was having an affair, and the other group was given a different backstory that highlighted that the protagonist wasn't having an affair. Now, both groups of people listen to the same story, but their brains diverge, right? They have different experiences of that same conversation, right? And we see this with the political situation in the U.S. right now, too. When people watch news clips about hot button issues like immigration, and you look at what happens in the brains of U.S. Democrats and Republicans, even though they're watching the exact same news clip, some of our brain systems that make meaning are not necessarily in sync across that political aisle. So the Democrats' brains are more similar to one another and the Republicans' brains are more similar to one another. And we see this distinction. And I think the hopeful thing about that is that if people have the same assumptions coming to the table, then when we consider new information, we can make similar meaning out of it. And so going back to that work example, when we're on a team and we have the potential to benefit from the diversity of many different people's experiences or perspectives or disciplinary expertise, we need to remember to build in time in our agendas and space in our workplaces to connect on a personal level, right? So that we have that trust going in, to really understand like what the assumptions are that people are bringing to the table before we dive into like figuring out what the solution is, right? Yeah, you mentioned the loneliness epidemic. It also makes me think about, we've been doing work in our lab creating neural signatures of loneliness. And I think some of us might have thought about loneliness as this ethereal kind of soft thing. And when we look at what happens in people's brains, there are these systematic patterns that shift where lonelier brains really look different than people who feel connected to the people around them. And that's true both in a trait-like way, like lonelier, like more or less lonely people, but also we have some emerging evidence that we haven't published yet, but that I'm really excited about, where even just doing different kinds of tasks seems like it can push that neural signature around. And we know from lots of neuroscience that as we repeat things over and over again, it kind of wears grooves
Right.
in our brain patterns.
So someone who's experiencing loneliness and that signature pattern, what is going on that's different from someone who is feeling really connected?
Well, one of the things I think is really fascinating, this is work that's led by my postdoc, Leticia Mulambe-Shilobu, and she's done work for years on loneliness. And it's the whole brain pretty much that's involved. Like you might have thought, or I thought before I started working with Leticia, that, maybe there would be brain systems that are involved in thinking about what other people think and feel, or these kind of more classically social brain systems. And they're involved. But so are so many others, right? Our attention systems, which direct us to pay attention to certain kinds of social cues or others, our, cognitive control systems that also are helping kind of direct our focus, our basic sensory systems, even the way that we're like, seeing and hearing and thinking and feeling, like the connections within and between these systems are like, there's so many systems that are implicated in this neural signature of loneliness that I think that's a really powerful insight, because it helps us see the way that when we start to feel lonely, it has knock-on effects on so many other things, right? We're not seeing the world in an objective way. We're seeing it colored through the lens of our level of social connection at the moment, right?
And unfortunately, I would gather that it probably leads to a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If it's shifting the way you view the world, it's going to start shifting your behaviors that might enhance the loneliness further or make you more distrusting and less social.
Exactly. And there's so much social psychology and behavioral evidence for that also, that when we feel lonely, that it biases the way that we then interact with other people, the things that we pay attention to, the way that we then, give more weight to negative feedback and other sorts of things, even though we're really craving that connection. And so loneliness has this pernicious effect of making it harder to do the thing that we most want to do.
There's another interesting part, or I guess view in the book that I think a lot about from leaders, and especially leaders who are listening to the show might be new into their role. And there's this power paradox and this dynamic that as we gain status, we actually become worse at reading people, but yet we think internally, because of the status sometimes, and that we have been elevated, that we're even better suited to be able to read people. So as you're sharing about diversity, like bringing these views together, well, status does come into play in those scenarios.
That is such an important thing for us to keep in mind, especially those of us who are fortunate enough to have some amount of power in our organizations or other communities, right? So the findings are so interesting. When we look at what happens both in people's brains as they have more status, then they start using their social relevance system in a different way. So people who have higher status sometimes don't use those social relevance systems as much when they're making sense of other people's experiences, or even just like faces, like looking at the faces of other people. And there's also a bunch of behavioral evidence that when, for example, somebody's in the role of being the boss, it really matters if they take other people's perspectives. I'm thinking about a study that Adam Galinsky did a while ago where people in the lab were randomly assigned to the role of being the boss or being the employee. So this isn't anything about them because they're just being randomly assigned. It's not that the people who are randomly assigned to be the boss are more talented or less talented or have different tendencies to take other people's perspectives. But when those people who had been named as having, power and influence in this particular experimental context we're also given instructions, we're given coaching to approach a problem solving task and take other people's perspectives, they were more likely, the teams did better. They came up with the solution more readily, and they generally did a better job at the experience. And so I think, that highlights that it's not just that like becoming higher in status or having more power makes it so that you can't do it. Just when we have all of these things that now we're responsible for and taking care of, maybe one of the things that goes away is taking a beat to try to understand the perspective of people who have less power or influence. And so, yeah, when we do it, it can be really effective. And then we do it less as we gain more power and status. And so then we don't benefit from the network that now we could have had access to.
So understanding that, I think a big part of this is raising awareness, but then actioning that for those who are in this leadership role who now may not have even realized that, they've weighed that in the calculation less because of everything else going on. What can we practically do to shift to be more perspective taking and bring that to our teams?
Well, one of the things, just going back to the Galinsky example, is reminding ourselves to do it, right? That we can actively take steps to try to gather information from other people, like about what they're thinking or feeling, what their experiences are like, and then we can make use of it. So it's not like the ability to do that just magically goes away. And so one of the superpowers that we have as humans is our ability to have conversations, right? We can talk to each other. And in some recent work that I've been involved with the team at Princeton, where there are two fMRI scanners in adjacent rooms next to each other, so we can actually look at what's happening in two people's brains simultaneously as they're having conversations. One of the things that I think is really cool is that both in conversations where people are just talking to be friends, so playing a game where we ask each other and answer questions about our life and our experiences, and also in negotiations where we're trying to come up with policy solutions to hard, consequential problems in the world. Getting on the same page, so having that kind of neural synchrony that we talked about before, is a good jumping off point. But what actually makes it so that people are enjoying the conversations and reaching that deeper consensus in the negotiation setting is exploration. So they are exploring more mental state space, meaning that they're covering a wider range of topics. They are using their brains in essentially like more diverse ways. And so like how do these things go together? Well, like imagine that we're in a field together. You and I could just like go off in random different directions, or we could stay really close to the trailhead where we started, or we can essentially like take each other's hands and go for a walk and explore lots of space together. And it's that last thing of like exploring new spaces together that I think can be really powerful. So, you were asking about like, how can we take advantage of this? Like asking good questions and listening. Sounds so basic, but it's a thing that sometimes we fail to do.
Another key point that you make in the book, a metaphor, is I think many of us don't realize that we are living in a cave with these protected belief systems that are influencing our version of reality. And then we find ourselves in difficult conversations where we're being defensive or we're being withdrawn and we don't want to hear what the other person has to share. I think in obviously an ideal world, it'd be great if we all had some ability outside of our cave to step into other people's shoes and see from their perspective. But what's actually going on with our brain and why are we protecting ourselves in this way?
Yeah, this is a thing I've been thinking about a lot recently. The question about defensiveness and what happens when we're defensive and why that might take place. And so first I'll say part of the reason this interests me a lot is because I have been in lots of situations where I notice that I'm rejecting information out of hand or shutting things down prematurely. And also when I try to convince other people to do something that I think will be good for their health or happiness, it can be so frustrating when we ask somebody that we love to make a change that we think will make them happier or healthier, and they're not open to it, right? So there's so many situations where this comes into play. And I think part of where this comes from is the overlap in our self-relevance and value systems. So in our brains, those systems that help us decide whether something is good or bad, likely to be rewarding or not rewarding, are really intertwined with the brain systems that help us think about what's me and not me. And so how does this play out? Well, you can see that when people get a suggestion to make a change and do something differently than they've been doing in the past, it can evoke these feelings that are not just about the specific thing in question, but also can feel like a threat to our sense of being a good person or being a competent person. Um, and and when that happens, then we can dismiss the information out of hand rather than considering the incoming coaching or advice or whatever it is.
And I think about myself personally, how difficult it is with my wife in those moments where, yeah, I may have done something or made a mistake and acted out of character, but in hearing that feedback, I cling to that identity that I have, that I'm well-meaning, that I am not trying to make that mistake. I would never do something like that purposely. And it can lead to challenges in the relationships that matter the most to us.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I talk about it in the book a little bit. This one night where I was hanging out with my partner, Brett, after our kids had gone to bed, and he called me out on using my phone. And I was just trying to respond to some emails from some students and be the kind of person I want to be at work. And he was not interested in that explanation, right? It was like, I'm doing the dishes and this is our time to hang out. And what are you doing? And initially I felt like really defensive and threatened because it's a relationship I care a lot about. But after a little bit of reflection, it was clear that he was right. Fast forward, actually, this morning, I was so impressed. Man, that guy, happy I married him. Like, we're hanging out with our kids and we're on a little Minecraft detox this week. So we've said that they can't play Minecraft this week just to open up some possibilities to do other things after school. And we've really tried to frame this as not like a punishment or anything, but just like, hey, there are so many things in the world that you might want to do. And Minecraft is crowding those out, which they get rationally, but they are not excited about emotionally.
Yeah.
So this morning, we're in the kitchen getting the kids ready for school, and Brett was doing something on his phone. And one of our kids was like, hey, like, you are restricting our screen time this week. Why don't we restrict your screen time this week? Like, you should get off your phone. And, you know, rewinding to the situation where Brett said that to me, I totally counter-argued and came up with reasons why that didn't apply to me in that moment, whatever. And I think it would have been very defensible for Brett to say, oh, well, I'm also trying to get ready for my workday, and to offer some reason. And he just said, yeah, great idea. You're right. Like, I would like to have more quality time with you. Let's sit down later and talk about how we could all be together in a way that we want to be together. So apparently later this afternoon, after the kids get home, we're going to all have like a family conversation about how we want to be in this space together. And I was so impressed. This like non-reactive, non-defensive approach. And the kids were just like, cool, great. Like, what a nice model in that moment, right?
Many of us don't think about how the device impacts those moments. So I think we have this ability, or I think I have this ability to multitask and be glancing at my phone, but be following my partner in conversation and have total awareness of what I'm doing or saying in the moment. In actuality, that's not at all what's happening in the brain. And these devices actually rob us of those really key moments with family, friends, people that we care about.
Oh, AJ, you are not alone. There are papers, actually scientific papers, that have looked at this, and scientists have shown what I think we know intuitively, which is that when you are on your phone, you don't experience that as a problem, that it's not something that you're actively thinking about as taking away from the social experience. But we all have had the experience of being with somebody who's on their phone, and we know that that sucks, right? That's terrible. It's not fun to be with somebody who's looking things up and just responding to one text message or doom scrolling while they, look here and you're trying to have a conversation with them. Like, that is not fun at all. And the data say that all of us who feel that way have many, many other, people that are like us in the world. And so then the question is, well, what do we do about that, right? And I think that goes back to the conversation that we were having about, like, if we take a step back and think about what actually matters to us, we can't expect that these changes are going to just happen on their own. We're in a situation where there are like huge profit motives of companies to keep us engaged with those media, and they're so good at it. And so if we want to make a change, we have to change the environment, right? We have to make it so that for the me who's right here, right now, it's easier and more fun and rewarding to do something different. So leaving our phone in another room is one evidence-based thing that makes it, easier for kids to do schoolwork and do better in school. It's something that makes it easier for us to have these kinds of high quality interactions, because then we don't have to be effortfully exerting self-control to make that choice moment after moment after moment to be here with the person that we're with, rather than deciding if we're going to look at the phone or habitually doing it in a way that we're not even consciously aware of. So it's analogous to if I'm sitting in faculty meeting and there's a plate of cookies in front of me, like by the end of that hour and a half, I'm going to eat a cookie, right? Like, it's not because I'm a bad person or because I have terrible self-control. It's just the environment is not conducive to eating my growing food, right? It's like, I'm going to eat the cookie.
Even the phone in the other room, we're still thinking about it. Even in these moments where we know the device isn't, yes, I'm not looking at the screen, it's still there. I'm thinking about the notifications that are piling up. I'm thinking about what I'm missing in the moment that I'm trying to have with my wife or our daughter. And for us, the one thing that we've really focused on this year in the new year, going to resolutions, is getting outside of the environment, just leaving the phones at home and going on a walk and being completely absorbed in nature, so that I'm not thinking about it in the other room, that, oh, the phone's in the office, and I'm thinking about what's going on in the office and how badly I want to get back to the office to solve those notifications.
There are a couple of pieces. I love the example that you're highlighting, because one is changing your environment, I think, can weigh into that reward system, making it more rewarding to be there with the people that you love. The other piece of it, though, that you're highlighting is there's a reason that we care about those notifications, right? And I think for me, at least, one of the reasons is that there are other people on the other side of those notifications. And that's where norms come into play and matter a lot. So there was a long time in my lab where people worked all the time, right? People were like, I remember when I was in grad school, and this was when Gmail had that little like chat feature on the side, and you could like see who was online, like when you were in your email, and be like, oh my God, my advisor is there. And it would be like 11 p.m. And I'd be like, if I message him this thing right now, maybe he'll look at it, right? And there's some reward in that little mini connection, right? And often he would. My grad school advisor was so fast at turning things around. But that kind of expectation that if you message somebody at 11 p.m. and they're going to respond, then sets up the feeling that you're describing of like, okay, if we have a norm and agreement that, even if it's not a spoken agreement, that we're going to respond to each other at 11 p.m., then having your phone in the other room means you're missing out on that thing, right? But if you have some sort of other agreements, often these are things that we need to set up more intentionally, like, hey, on our team now, the norm is like, unless it's an emergency, like I'm not expecting you to respond to emails or to things really outside of business hours. And we have agreements with each other, like if it's really an emergency, like I'll call you and I'll tell you. And that's going to be very, very rare. And that means you don't have to be checking Slack. You don't have to be checking your email, because you know that if there is some crazy thing that came up, I'm going to reach out in a different way. So like, go on the walk, do your thing, right? But if we don't have that expectation with other people, then we're going to feel anxious perpetually.
The problem, and I've worked with this with a few clients, is we don't realize the norms that we're setting as leaders with our team by answering the email that late at night, or by sending it to get it off of our plate so we don't have to think about it. It feels good to clear our inbox. It feels good to reply to everything. But those replies at 11 o'clock at night, that floods the other person. And now the new norm is, well, I have to be in front of my computer. I have to be responsive. The boss is responding at this time. And I think the norms really can be eased if you schedule it to send in the morning. you can write it. It's out of your inbox, but it doesn't hit their inbox till the morning. And now we're keeping our communication practically during working hours and creating time and space in our lives for the people that matter, our loved ones, our family and friends.
Yeah, also talking about it. So if you are somebody who is the boss, I think that, sometimes we have the intuition or the impetus to not talk about it, to just be like, "Oh, what'd you do this weekend? Nothing." Whatever, like to kind of model these norms that like we're working so hard. And we can work really hard and also have people that we care about and that are important to us that we want to spend time with. And so the stories that we tell each other also shape the norms and values in our organizations and then more broadly in the culture that we're in.
Just going back to that defensiveness, I know myself, I've struggled with it. You have that great anecdote in the book with your partner struggling with it. What can we practically do in those moments? Because another key part of this is timing. So when that defensiveness really crystallizes, it makes it hard to come back from.
There are different kinds of tools that I think can help in different kinds of situations. So in the book, one of the things I talk about is if you're in a situation where you're going to be giving coaching to somebody, or maybe if you're a doctor and you're about to give some health advice, that giving people a chance to reflect on core values first, the kind of values affirmation that we were talking about before, is one tool that psychologists use to help people zoom out and see that their self-worth isn't tied to like the specific thing that you're about to message about or the specific change that you're suggesting. We don't always have the luxury to do a 5-minute writing exercise before we give advice. And in the moment, when we're just having a conversation, when Brett was doing the dishes and told me that he didn't like it when I was on my phone, it's not like I'm going to sit down and start journaling, right? Like that would also be counterproductive. But there are also other tools. So like, for example, there have been large, what we call meta-analyses, like aggregating many other studies that show that the motivations that we have in a given situation shape how open we are to new uncongenial information, like information that challenges us. So if we have a motive to be really accurate or to solve a particular problem together, like those kinds of mindset frames can make us more open to information that challenges our prior beliefs or that suggests we should do something differently. And so cultivating a sense of being open, cultivating a sense of wanting to get things right and to seeing those kinds of new information not as threats, but as constructive, I think is also really powerful. Like going back to how we were talking about before, our identities really shape a lot of the decisions that we make. If we make a New Year's resolution to be more open to that kind of feedback, one is in the moment, we can say, okay, like responding in a calm way and like considering this information is compatible with who I am, who I want to be. And then also we can be even more proactive and we can ask for the feedback at times when we feel like we can handle it. So, right, there are different moments and, just thinking about with my team, there are moments where it's like, I am at capacity. There's so many things that I'm juggling or I'm having a really stressful day. And like, this is not the moment where I feel like I can take in really thoughtful feedback, but sometimes I can. And so kind of starting to have a culture where we ask each other on a regular basis how we might do things differently, or where we find out, that it's driving Brett nuts that I'm using the phone. When I feel like I'm in a position to address it, to potentially brainstorm about how we can do things differently, and to also, in addition to giving advice or giving critique, being on the same team as we generate solutions. So if somebody tells you that they don't love the way you're doing things, I think it's very reasonable to say like, okay, well, let's think about how we might solve this problem together, right? So that they're part of
the we
having to come up with the solution as well.
It creates a great norm as a leader to showcase that, hey, I am open to feedback. I'm seeking feedback. And then you're taking control of the times that you're asking for that feedback, knowing when you will be at your best. Maybe it's getting a workout the day before, or maybe it's after some huge event happening in a positive way and saying, okay, now's some time to see how we can improve for the next moment.
Yes. And I would add one other thing, which is in addition to feeling like mentally or emotionally like you're in a position where you can take in the feedback, also protecting the times that you can do something about it, right? So in a work situation where there's a hierarchy, it's a little bit vulnerable for somebody that you potentially have a control over their raise, let's say, to give you critical feedback. And so if you're going to ask for that kind of feedback, doing it at a time when you can act on it, when you actually have the capacity, the bandwidth within your team to make changes that make sense. So for a long time, we used to do this like lab culture survey where people would give anonymous feedback about things that were going well and things that they wanted to change in the lab. And, doing that at a moment when everybody was at capacity, it sort of felt like a waste. It was like people would spend their time and energy doing the survey. And then if we don't have bandwidth to actually sit down and talk through what are we going to do about these things, then we've taken a bunch of people's time and then also potentially erode trust that the feedback is being taken seriously, right? Whereas if we do it at a time when we can take on board some of the good suggestions and act on them, then I think it makes it feel more worthwhile to take that risk and give the feedback.
I think that time is kind of a key through line that we've had throughout the episode here. And you have an anecdote about your grandmother in the book and about some calculating personal time. And I think that's a challenge that many of us face with the deadlines we have, the personal goals we have for ourselves, the career goals, and how motivated we are to not recognize how that's impacting others around us.
Yeah, I'm feeling that so much right now. My grandmother is now 101.
Wow.
We say 101 and having fun. And right after Thanksgiving, actually, she fell and broke her hip. And that put such a fine point on all of this. Like it was, my brother and my siblings and my mom and I sort of dropped everything to be at the hospital and to help her recover. And she's been working so hard, with the physical therapy and doing the walking and the stairs and all of these things. But I'm also noticing that the time with her, like she's so fun and kind of dry wit, sarcastic, has lots of interesting stories. And so in the book, I talk about how she's one of my favorite people and just figuring out ways to spend more time with her. And then you layer on top this thing that I think many folks experience when they get to the age where their parents or other people that they love also have health challenges, where it's like, it's not always possible that in those moments we are just sitting around joking or telling the deep, meaningful stories. And so, sitting in the waiting room of a hospital or just going through the day-to-day business of when is the physical therapy appointment and when is your cardiologist appointment, all of those things, like thinking about what are the frames that still can make that feel valuable, right? That still can make it feel like, all right, we're in this moment together. Like, I know that my grandmother can like feel how much I love her and care about her because we're like physically together and talking about it. So, I mean, it's a little bit of a side quest to just say, I think there's the like best case scenario where we figure out how to prioritize the time together. And it's like our fantasy of the time together. And then also, how do we do that when going back to the workout example or the New Year's resolutions, the reward is maybe like not as obvious.
Mm-hmm.
And there, I think, figuring out ways to build in some humor and build in some of that feeling of connection and talking about why it's meaningful to do the thing, even if it's not like immediately obviously fun, are things that are on my mind right now, just based on the way that I think about the brain and decision making and this moment that we're in right now.
Many of us are feeling that. Some of us are feeling it in grief, the time that was lost with people that we care about and the decisions that we made around our own productivity, our own goals that got in the way of that quality time spent together.
For sure. I mean, my dad died like right before in 2019. So it's been like 6 or 7 years now. And I still think about that every day, right? I think about it when I'm making choices about how to spend time with my mom or how to spend time with my grandmother, and having little kids, right? We also know that the time when they want to hang out with us is finite. And so it's a beautiful and terrifying choice to have, right? To think about, like, am I going to invest in this work that's meaningful to me? Am I going to invest in spending time with my kids who want to be with me right now? Am I going to spend time with my grandmother, where I know that at 101, like, statistically, those opportunities are limited. And then, when you talk about the grief, like, I think that feeling of regret, like, I wish I had done things differently, can loom so large. And then, well, where do we go from there? And one of the things that resonates with me is my colleague Emile Bruneau, who died shortly after my dad. He had a glioblastoma brain tumor. Talked a lot about when he was in the hospital, thinking about his mom who had passed away, and about the way that he was deepening his relationship with her by thinking about the wisdom that she had shared with him, or just moments that they had had together, like having conversations in his mind with her, doing things that she liked to do. And I feel like that a lot too. Like, I started learning to play the guitar after my dad died as like a way to connect with him in a different way. And now my kid, Theo, plays the guitar. And, we all go through these experiences of losing people that we love. And at work, we don't talk about it, right? I remember after my dad died, coming in and people shared all of these incredible stories with me. And I just thought, like, how is anybody, like, moving around in the world like things are okay when things are so clearly upside down for so many folks? And I don't know what the right answer to that is, right? Because there are reasons that we have the boundaries that we have at work. And also, it's such a human experience to love other people and to care about them, and to lose them. So I don't know if you have things that have resonated with you or that you want to share, but I just think it's such a human experience.
I mean, I think about losing my dad and the ways that I try to keep his memory alive, and also now through the lens of being a dad myself, and like, how do I want to spend that time that I have with my daughter, and what can wait? What are those moments that are less important in that value calculation for me? And I've shared with friends who haven't started families yet, friends who are single, just the value calculation in general has shifted so much for me. I've thought way more about my own mortality. I've thought way more about where I'm spending my time than I ever had before being a dad.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, just that beautiful experience of having a kid and connecting with people who loved your dad. Like, I hope it's okay that I share this. Like, my brother has a baby who's going to be one really soon. And I'm really lucky because they live in Philly where I live. And shortly after his kid was born, he was like, I'm gonna watch videos. Our dad used to play the guitar, like I said. I'm gonna watch videos of dad playing the guitar, and I'm gonna hold my kid and like have a really good cry. Like, if you want to come over and join for that, like, you're welcome to do that. And it was like, of course I want to do that, right? Like, in some ways, I think we sometimes avoid that experience of showing the grief, or of having sad emotions, or things we might label as negative emotions. But it's also such a powerful way to connect with other people who are going through the same experience. So that's a little bit of a cartoon version of it. But, when we talk about it and when we are intentional about honoring those things, it can feel so good.
For me, in the beginning, I tried to run from those intense feelings and emotions as part of dealing with the grief. And now I actually treasure those moments where the regret does pop up, or the thought of that moment together, that Michigan football game experience we had as the season's going on. Like, that memory and the tears it provides me hold more value now. In the past, I would have tried harder to run away from them.
Go Blue.
Go Blue. As we wrap, I'd love to hear, looking at, for our audience, now understanding the value calculation, what's some shift that you would recommend that they make in their own value calculation?
Well, I think that idea that we talked about of just taking a step back and doing an audit every once in a while to think about what are those bigger picture goals and values that we want to be building our life around can be so powerful because, like we said, whether you like it or not, these value calculations are unfolding all day, every day, and we're making choices. We're making choices about how we spend our time and energy, who we're spending time with, how we're showing up, whether we're reacting defensively. And those are things that if we take a minute to think about how to set up the environment in a way that's going to make it easier and more rewarding to make the choices that get us where we want to go, that are compatible with those bigger picture goals and values, then we don't have to be making every single decision in isolation. And so thinking about that kind of alignment, I think, can give us more agency to an extent. So that's probably one of the bigger things that I try to do on a somewhat regular basis for myself and with my team, with my family. And then the second piece is how powerful the social environment is, both how powerfully other people are influencing us, even when we're not necessarily aware of it. And so thinking about the voices that are in our heads and the people that we're interacting with, and then also the ways that we're showing up for other people. So recognizing the power that our choices make that our choices have to influence other people's decision making and thoughts and ways of approaching new things. And I think that when we think about it that way, it can go back to the like, okay, so what are the things that I really want to be spreading, and can give us that additional motivation to do things that might seem hard or that might seem scary or challenging, not just for ourselves, but also for the people that are around us.
I love that. And I think that piece is really powerful, especially for our audience. So thank you for sharing. Where can they find out more about your book and the work that you do, Emily?
Well, our lab website, falklab.org, has information both about the book, about what we value, and also all of our lab's publications for free.
All right. I'm excited to see that new data.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us.